free publicity in television, radio time. Why do you believe that that bill is a sham? And also, you did not mention in your remarks what you would do to fix the campaign finance system.
Well, I've covered that so many times, and it takes a while to answer, but I'll be glad to cover it again. Step one, I use it campaign reform, which is broader than just the money. Okay? Set the highest ethical standards for Congress and the White House. No more gifts, no more trips or junkets. No more free meals. Pass laws with significant penalties, not rules. Give Congress and the White House the same retirement plans and health care as the average American. Then they will feel your pain. Now, you tell me one reason why the people up here should have better health care than you do since you're paying for it. Now, I would come back and fuss at you the other way if you had better health care than they did. I think that they ought to have the same that you do, but I cannot understand all these special privileges. Campaign reform. Reduce the cost of campaign by shortening the election cycle to no more than 4 months. Vote on Saturdays and Sundays, not Tuesdays, so working people can get to the polls. Replace the Electoral College, which is it's as obsolete as a dinosaur, for electing the president with a direct vote so that every vote counts. Prohibit announcement of exit polls until the last polling booth is closed in Hawaii. Because if we know anything, the American people want to vote for a winner, right? Let's try to have them vote their consciences. Have you seen the exit polls from 1992 where they said, who would you have voted for if you'd voted your conscience? 41% of the people said they would have voted for me, 31% said they would have voted for Clinton, and 27% said they would have voted for Bush. Then they said, why didn't you vote your conscience? And they said, because we were told again and again and again and again, don't waste your vote on Perot. He can't win. Guess how they were told that? By spending millions and millions and millions of dollars of this money we've been talking about today. We didn't do that. Require the members of Congress to raise all money from voters in their district and members of the Senate to raise all money from voters within their state. And under no circumstances, if you are on a committee that has tremendous control over major corporations, could you ever take a penny from any of those corporations. And that is just a state-of-the-art trick. Now, get on one of those committees and you are set in terms of funding. Term limits, come to serve, not make a career here. Three terms for the House, two terms for the Senate. These are the fundamentals that we're talking about, and I can go on to restrictions on ever becoming a lobbyist, ever becoming a foreign lobbyist or a domestic lobbyist. And basically, let's get back to, I say, the principles of scouting here, and that will attract the people you want. We now have a gambling house mentality up here. You come up here, play the game, cash in big time when you leave, and do all kinds of things right down the edge of the field while you're here. You and I shouldn't tolerate that.
Mr. Perot, in 1992, a central part of your presidential campaign was the budget deficit. Now it appears as if the budget deficit will almost take care of itself through no other reason than a sweetened economy. I'd like to ask you if you feel that the credit for a balanced budget, if that indeed is what we will have in the space of about a year, is any of the credit due to the Clinton administration?
I'll say this again, I covered it in my main speech. I've been showing you this Congressional Budget Office graph that shows that the deficit would tend to go down to zero by the year 2002. Go back and listen to the White House and Congress. They kept talking about 2002, 2002, 2002. That's because it was going to happen anyhow. Now we have the economy is strong for the time being, but that's for the time being. And so we get there a little bit ahead of 2002. But these massive problems that I just defined in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, so on and so forth, that are out there in the future, keep in mind, when we created Social Security, we had back in 1945, I think we had 40 people, that's long after it was created, 45 people at work for every person retired. Then in the 50s, it got down to 16 people at work for every person retired. Today, it's only 3 people at work for every person retired, and you cannot have a pay-as-you-go plan. We've got to transition it, we've got to protect it, we don't want to take it away from anybody, but the sooner you start making the transition to a plan that will work with a huge retired population, the less stress you're going to place on your children and grandchildren who will be paying the taxes on what is now a pay-as-you-go system that cannot work. Medicare and Medicaid, as you know, are out of control. They've got to be brought back in to something that's properly run, properly managed, get the waste out of it, redesign the systems and streamline them, and make them work on a cost-effective way. So if you want to live in Never Never Land, just assume that these guys in Washington one more time, did a magic wand trick, and this was happening before they ever got here. Congressional Budget Office figures show it, and it goes off like a rocket. I'll be far more excited if they start talking about what they're going to do out here in 2010, 2030, because that's when the big cancer comes in.
One major issue facing the country and the world, and that touches on many of the themes that you mentioned in your speech, including foreign trade, including foreign diplomacy, and including financial management, is the Asian financial crisis. Should Congress approve the new U.S. contribution to the International Monetary Fund?
This is a very complicated problem. This is at least a 30-minute speech to explain, and I would really love to have the American people understand how complex it is. As you start pouring money, who is guaranteeing this money? See, a huge part of the guarantee comes from the U.S. taxpayers and the IMF and what have you. Money doesn't fall out of the sky. Now then, what is happening in these countries? Their currencies are going through the floor. You say, how could this happen? Because they had the world by the tail. Well, it was the way they ran the countries and the way they managed it. They blew it. They had the opportunity and they blew it. Now we're racing in to bail them out, and we've got to make sure that whatever bailout plan we have is one we can afford and one that will work, and one that they will learn not to repeat these bad habits, and they will have to pay the price for having done some of these things. We can't just bulletproof everything for everybody. In the meantime, now then, I'm one of these countries. My country is deeply in debt. I've got a giant labor force. They work for nothing. They're making tennis shoes for $3.50 that by the time we get them to the U.S. only cost $5, but by the time we do all the advertising promotion, you probably pay $150 for them. And if you can't afford them, you kill somebody on the street to get a pair. I can make those tennis shoes even cheaper, right? Because my currency's gone in the tank, my people are desperate, they're going to be working for less. Now then, if we make all the great things in the world, we've got to sell it to somebody to get my country back up on its feet, right? Guess who the biggest buyer in the world is? The good old USA. I think it's 5% of the world's population, roughly 25% of the world's buying power. Now then, as we buy these items at very, very low prices, more and more manufacturing is going to go over to these areas. We'll have less and less manufacturing here. We will take this phenomenon I described earlier where the father and mother have to work and barely make the paycheck that the father alone could make 25 years ago, and that the standard of living is down for 4 out of 5 working Americans. This is going to really create an interesting problem. There'll be a huge outflow of dollars back over to that part of the world paying for the goods. And that would give them the money to start to bail their countries out. And all we will be doing is getting the debt that we've guaranteed paid off if it works. And we've got to really, really learn from experience and be careful here and be sure-footed and not just arbitrarily lunge into these things without thinking it through, because this is a problem that is still unfolding. There have been some really interesting articles, see, because so far you haven't heard the word China mentioned in the press. But the economists and the serious thinkers whose work I've been reading in the past few days are saying this is going to impact China very, very soon. China is a huge country with a huge percentage of the world's population. And as this problem grows, it can also impact us. So we've got to be careful and sure-footed, and it is extremely complex. But I want you to understand that basically all of these countries in trouble will be counting on selling their goods to us so that they will be able to get out of trouble, and that will cause more and more jobs to go to those countries and leave this country. They'll wind up with the jobs, we'll wind up with their goods, in plain Texas talk. So we've put ourselves in a trap, and it's getting worse. Now, buried in all of this, these are the things that drive me crazy. You know what Mexico's #1 export is? Anybody raise their hand? illegal drugs. Makes you proud, doesn't it? There is no way that you can stop all those trucks and inspect them. We've got this big company, Costco from China, that's got the big Navy base out there that brings in big containers. With luck, we inspect 1 out of 80. Now then, let's take that kind of percentage of inspection down to Mexico. I think if you and I wanted to, we could figure out a way to hide things that are small and get them through, don't you? Sure you can. I cannot. Now, keep in mind, you've heard the total, we're going to stamp out drugs inside the U.S. prison system. Well, I'm all for that, but I think if you can ever stamp them out anywhere, if you can't stamp them out inside something as tightly controlled as a prison system, we have got a problem. But if I can divert you to the prison system and away from the Mexican border and these other places, and there is no way I can overstate to all of you the damage that drugs are doing to this country and to our children and to the next generation genetically. And if you don't believe me, go to the charity hospitals and look at those crack babies. Typically they're there 42 days, cost $125,000 to bring them into the world. Many of them are permanently genetically damaged, and the mother disappears in 3 days, and they become wards of the state. And down the East Coast a few years ago, these neonatal units were all at 125% or more capacity because of that drug problem.
The 10th grade history class of Mrs. Elmore at Catholic High School in Huntsville, Alabama, spent 1 hour developing 2 questions for Ross Perot that they wanted to ask, and they're both good questions. Mr. Perot, what is your position on the current crisis in the Persian Gulf? What suggestions do you have for the Clinton administration?
Follow Churchill's advice, never cozy up to tyrants. And if you don't want a Saddam Hussein, don't create him. Now, I beg all of you to remember, we created that guy. We gave him his nuclear, his chemical, and his biological capability. Then we went over to straighten it all out. And we got into the 100-hour war. And then we decided it would be great PR to stop before we accomplished our objective and took him out of Baghdad. Got rid of him. I got a picture that an Air Force sergeant sent me. He's got Noriega sitting next to him, and it's the thumbs up. And basically saying, we got the sucker. That's what we should have done with Hussein. I wish I had a picture from an Air Force sergeant with his thumbs up with Hussein sitting next to him. But no, we didn't, because we had the perfect war. And we stopped before we take any more risks. War is ugly, war is dirty. There's nothing pretty about war, but the only thing worse than one perfect war would be to have to get into another one. And Saddam Hussein knows he can thumb his nose at us pretty well. And we've got to make it clear one way or another to him that we're not going to let him destabilize the Middle East. And in the meantime, we have allies selling him, people that we refer to as friends and allies are selling nuclear weapons. They'll sell you anything you can pay for. We are going to be in a very unstable world, no matter what we do, and the world of the suitcase nuclear weapon. Just imagine, think of all the stuff pouring into this country from all over the world. Don't you think you and I could get nuclear weapons into the country that can fit into a briefcase? Sure. Now, let's assume you had 50 of those and you had 50 martyrs who really wanted to die for a great cause. Can you imagine the chaos you could create in this country? This is the technology that we're facing as we go into the next century, and we have got to have a strong, well-prepared military force. We have got to be a military superpower, and we have got to be an economic superpower, because you can't be a military superpower unless you have the money to pay for all that. That's the way the walls came tumbling down in Russia. Ronald Reagan just spin them right through the floor. It was a high-risk deal, but he did it, and it worked, right? And in retrospect, we should all be very grateful but now we're into new phases. But we're going to have to be very hard-minded about keeping peace in the world and not get into a single conversation about it's good PR. Think how it would sound on television to talk about the 100-hour war. It would sound a lot better to have it over with, right? It would sound a whole lot better if we would have looked those men in the eye that were wounded in combat with chemical weapons and treated them when they came home instead of saying, oh, that's stress. I hope you followed that one. It's not stress. It's been proven medically that those men are ill. And God bless the Pentagon now. The Pentagon is working night and day to try to treat them, but they first had to have the hard evidence. That's been done. This is the unstable world we're in, and it's going to take a very strong, stable United States to keep the world a peaceful place in the 21st century.
Also, a lot of young college students and high school students thinking about their place in this American society have questions that raise different issues than may have been the case in 1992 and 1996, and that is the questions of affirmative action, both in college entrances and also in the marketplace, in this new high-tech marketplace. What is your word to young people entering this society and about fair chances that they have with regard to affirmative action?
I'd like to talk to all of them, and I'd particularly like to talk to their parents, and I would especially like to talk to all of the people, let's say at the very, very bottom of the economic ladder, who are having babies. The greatest thing we can do is get it over to every mother and father in this country how a baby's brain gets connected. Trillions of neurons get connected. By the time you're 18 months, you have a positive or negative image of yourself. By the time you're 3 years old, you've learned how to learn or failed to learn how to learn, and by the time you're 6 years old, the ability of the neurons to connect has been starting to shut down. What chance does a disadvantaged child who's had no loving care from parents, none of the nurturing that you gave your children, have if the neurons are shut down? All the money in the world on education won't let that child tap the full potential. On the other hand, I can take you to a school that takes these little children when they're born, keeps them through the 3rd grade, and 80% of them are on the A honor roll when they go into the public schools. You want to change America in one generation? Cut out all these squishy little meetings here where you have somebody holding hands with 2 kids, and get out on the street and fix the problem, and we can do that. That's the greatest thing we can do. Now, to have this, let's assume it's a minority disadvantaged child, but to have that child's brain fully tapped, that's the key to that child's success. But if that child never got wired, in effect the neurons never got connected, all the remedial education in the world can't fix that. All the affirmative action in the world can't fix that. Now, we can do all those things, and I'm for doing all those things, but now that we know what the real problem is, this is kind of like putting your finger in the dike rather than trying to figure out why the dike is leaking. We can change America in one generation if we do those things. And I pray that at some point Washington will get energized and now, heaven help us if Washington tries to implement this program. Washington would have trouble getting 2 mules harnessed up and going down the road. The point is, the schools have got to be run at the local level. You've got to give the ownership back to the families in the community, and particularly in these very disadvantaged areas, you've got to have those schools for those little 1, 2, and 3-year-old children right in the neighborhood, and they need to be tiny because somebody's got to give them the love and the hugging and the attention and the reading too and the singing, and all the things you do is caring parents. That connects the neurons. And if you have not read this literature, please get it, because it's all available now, and it can change our country and change the world. Do you know the odds that a genius can be in the jungles of New Guinea is just as good as a genius can be in an upper middle class home when the child is born? Now, isn't it a tragedy that a potential Einstein out there will never have the opportunity because the neurons never get connected in those very early years? To show you how important it is, blindfold a baby at birth. That's normal. Keep that baby blindfolded for 6 months, and the baby will be blind for life because the neurons that connect in and allow vision to go to the brain and see the pictures never get connected. To show you the impact, and this is a simple little thing, and I'll get off the subject. I hope everyone here that knows someone who's expecting a baby will say, sing a certain song to that again and again while you're pregnant. Then after your baby's born and while the baby's very small, sing some other song, the baby will ignore you. Sing that song and the baby will react. There's nothing that will ever replace love and attention. Now, when both parents have to work, we've had a big setback, right? And all of the fancy daycare in the world won't replace the mom and the attention that moms have traditionally given the little ones. But these special schools with people with special training and a deep love for these little children can do it.
Thank you, Mr. Perot. And before we close out, this is your 9th coffee mug. And also, special gift that we're just starting to give out, sir. This is the brand new history book of the National Press Club. It's called Reliable Sources, available at the Press Club. There you go.
Thank you.
And also a certificate of appreciation if you lost the other 8. Here's one.
Okay, great.
Okay. Final question sent up. Do you have any money to lend to Newt Gingrich for his legal fees and ethics fines? While you're at it, any extra for President Clinton?
I give you a very short answer to that, no. But you do understand that part of the deal was when Dole loaned Gingrich the money, it was with the understanding that Gingrich would have to pay Dole back if Dole ever became a lobbyist. Be interesting to watch that one, right? Let's go see what we have here. But let's put it in perspective now. These are not evil people. They're trapped in an evil system. And if we will ever have the stomach to straighten out the system, the same people that we're discussing here, under the new set of rules, can just be straight as an arrow. But we have gotten the cost of campaigns. See, the cost of campaigns has gone up by a factor of 9 and 10 in the last 15 or 20 years. It's just the price is obscene. And if we don't stop that, we'll have a continuation of this. And I'll leave you with this thought. When you think about all the things it took to create this country, and all the things we've talked about today that we should do, I would rather work on these things than on the really tough problems that I will take this any time over fighting the American Revolution. And anybody that understands war will too. That was a surefire loser. Now this shows, you say, is the impossible possible? We didn't have a chance against Great Britain. If anybody had understood the problem, they wouldn't have fought them, right? But deep down in here, they had something you and I don't have. They had the burning desire to be free, and they were willing to do it, and they did what it took, and they did it. John Paul Jones was sinking. Did you know that? Father of the American Navy, that great story they keep, but now, you know, in the world of spin, you don't say, poor guy was sinking. The British, when they called out for his surrender, it was a non-issue. He was going down. As a matter of fact, he had lashed himself to the British ship to slow down the rate of sinking. And Jones called back, I have not yet begun to fight. But he had no idea how he was going to. But one enlisted man climbed the mast, went out the yard arm, and dropped a basket of hand grenades on the British ship. On his own initiative. You say, did John Paul Jones order him? No, John Paul Jones never thought of it. Nothing like creativity and initiative. There's a big explosion, and John Paul Jones at that moment knew what he was going to do. He boarded the British ship, he put the fire out, Jones' ship sank, and he sailed home to victory. All I'm saying is there are a lot of ways to win, right? And there's no excuse for losing, particularly when you look at what we have here. They didn't have anything, and they won the revolution. We have all 52 cards in the deck. Surely we can win this game, right? If we just have the will. Or we can sit back and listen to the Lawrence Welk music pouring out of Washington and think, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And there's no greater curse we could leave to our children or grandchildren. Yet if we just grab the bull by the horns now and go to work on these problems, every single one of them can be solved. And I hope we will. It's a privilege to be with you. And thank you very much.
I'd like to thank you for coming, and I'd also like to thank National Press Club staff members Kate Goggin, Joanne Booz, Pat Nelson, Melanie Abdow-Dermott, and Howard Rothman for helping organize today's lunch. Reporters who are here, we're going to take about a 10-minute break and end the luncheon part of this and go off the air as well. Mr. Perot will be around to answer some more questions as part of a Q&A. So if you're a reporter and would like to remain, please do, but we will take about a 10-minute break until we start that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Nice meeting you. Thanks for having me.
Good questions. They went well.
Is there anything they can do?
All of them.
John Todd.
You just have to let the time break down. I mean, you get time for that. That would be fun.
see.